Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. And in today's episode, we are going to be talking about Black mental health and as it pertains to self-hate, okay? Because that is exactly where we are today. And first of all, let me just say this. As we are really encroaching in some very tumultuous political waters, okay? Like it's always been that, but I feel like this is kind of what is rising. I honestly kind of just want to lay low. I think I'm at a place in my life where I definitely will be retreating. So you may get a lot less content from me in the up and coming months. In addition to that, I have actually been reconsidering this platform, y'all. Like I've been reconsidering Renaissance Room and wanting to do content in a different way. I don't actually know if I'm going to be able to merge the intellectualism with the content that I want to do moving forward. And I know you guys are probably like, you don't really have to, be all of you, do it all, but there's niche, there are people who like certain things on the internet. And I don't know, I might honestly be pivoting, I might be pivoting. So I just kind of wanted to give you guys a little bit of a heads up concerning that. And yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Blackness and let's talk a little bit about self-hate, right? A perfect example of this, and just to kind of give us a framework to work within, right? When you start to integrate a lot of people, right? Technology has integrated us in a way that gentrification never could, right? In a way that policies and changes with law and personal experience just likely would not have been able to, and hasn't done yet, right? On the ground level, we have not evolved to that point, to this point where we actually do have that level of integration in our real lives. We just don't, right? So we're integrated, okay? But when you dial it back, so let's take a look at immigrants, for example. Immigrants come from completely different countries, right? But in addition to them coming from different countries, they have a homeland, they have a base, they have a foundation, right? They have family members, they have community. Like it's just not the same, right? And I think this is the one of the things that is so heartbreaking about African American history and it just really being lost on America, right? And this is one of the things that is so saddening about this lack of education is that you have a bunch of people today who want to understand, but they're so caught up in their misunderstanding and they're so caught up in their own personal biases and prejudices and what is sold to them, right? Just through racism in America, that they have no real concept of what has taken place and what is actually going on, right? When we talk about how the word is passed, right? And that's just me kind of like paraphrasing. Y'all know I'm reading Clint Smith's book. You have to understand that today we sugarcoat history so much so, right? So much so that people aren't really getting the truth about how brutal it was and what African Americans have endured in this country. It is a freaking miracle, right? In the words of Toni Morrison, that we are still alive today. Like it is a miracle that you even see Black people around today. You see what I'm saying? And I don't think that anybody knows what we have forged, right? When you start talking about words like resilient and hope, we are some of the most hopeful as people. I think James Baldwin spoke about that, right? Just how African Americans are so hopeful for a nation that just keeps abusing them. You know what I mean? And there was actually a writer that I was reading his book. The title actually kind of caught me by surprise. It actually was about an immigrant. I think she may identify as African American, and she talked about the narcissism of the American dream. But by the title, I think she might have actually framed it in a way that was like talking about Black people, but like, I started reading the book and I'm like, wait a minute, this is not a black person. And so it's not just disrespectful, but I just think for the simplicity of terminology, I'll say it's disrespectful when immigrants do that. But I just think that at the end of the day, what you're seeing now is a bunch of people who want to know the truth. And when you have a lot of people who are covering up the truth, or a lot of people who just simply don't know the truth, right? You have a lot of people who are also in this really tough space that has always existed for those who are generating income, right? When you start to generate income, when you have a platform, you have a sense of livelihood, you've been able to assimilate in American society, and you went to college and you're doing well for yourself, there's a price you pay for that. And I wanted to pause there because I think it's so important for people to understand that, right? There is a price you pay, okay, to assimilate within our society, okay? And that typically comes at things like truth telling. That typically comes at things like, being very overt in the realities of American society and its grotesque history as it pertains to African Americans, right? Like, you have to be so careful of your language, of your conduct, all these different things, because again, the framework that we're existing in is white supremacy. Okay. And within white supremacy says, hey, listen, right? Like, you're going to come into the society, you're going to be integrated, you're going to assimilate, but you are going to aspire to our standards, okay, of living and being. And that's why other cultures are penalized for simply existing, right? Africans and other cultures, they don't really experience the same like penalization, because the focal point is African Americans, because when you built the country, you have to stay oppressed. You know what I mean? Like, we are the foundation. We are the soil. You see what I mean? We're the building blocks of a lot of this. So it's like, of course, we're going to have to stay at the bottom of the food chain because that's just what the system is predicated upon, right? And so you have other cultures, and that's why they try to assimilate. But I don't want to veer too far left. I want to get my thoughts together. But first, I want to really speak to African immigrants, because one of the things that's so interesting to me about African immigrants is that they also struggle with self-hate, right? When I meet African immigrants, not only do I see that they want to either be white or they want to be black, or I notice that just through watching TV, watching things like Netflix, looking at how they are on the media and certain shows and things like that, they act like black people. You see what I'm saying? So at what point as Africans, I think we have to, maybe as a cultural thing, we got to be real about what's really going on here, and I think because people today are so hurt by the experience that they've had with people, and you talk about resilience, well, I think that is a overarching theme, right? For a lot of people who have just experienced hurt in general, right? But Black people who've been hurt by white people, Africans who've been hurt by African Americans, like, you talk about resilience, it's like, in general, are people resilient, right? Are people able to overcome certain experiences and not generalize an entire culture that they don't even have an understanding of? You see what I'm saying? Like, that's what I really don't understand. And then I think too, when you start talking about conviction, well, let's get this straight, right? Conviction can come from things like your personal values. I think I gave this reference of like Candace Owens. It could come from things like political affiliation, right? That's what you're seeing today. It can come from things like reading books and actually being a scholar and studying a body of work and having a array of knowledge pertaining to a particular subject or a field of study, right? Like, so conviction comes from a lot of different things. But when you have a bunch of people who are very convicted, but they don't really have any preface for being this convicted, it's like, okay, now you're just getting a bunch of screaming matches. Now you're just having a melting pot of people who are just so incredibly angry because they want to be part of this pie, but they don't actually understand why they're not able to be a part of it, right? And what I mean by that is you have a bunch of Black people who hate themselves, and they say, well, Black people are degenerates and Black people are this and Black people are that, but they can't quite fit into white supremacy, right? Like, they can't quite fit into that society, no matter how many times they want to play into femininity content, no matter how many times, you see so many Black women playing into certain type of aesthetics with wigs and weaves and makeup and all these different things. It's like, you will never be white. You know what I mean? So it's a very interesting dynamic. And I think with immigrants are able to assimilate and essentially talk smack about other cultures because they have such a large network, right? Not only do immigrants experience a more positive stereotype because they're coming from nations where they are educated, right? They were able to attain their degrees. They were able to, so they have a completely different framework to operate in and to exist in within American society. And it's just not the same, you know. In addition to that, for so many people, I know we're finally having the conversations that African Americans are every bit a part of America as anybody else, right? But what we're not doing is reading up about African American history. You come off the plane, you come here, and all you have is opinions. All you have is the billboards of the white men, the white women, the family, right? And even before that, I'm pretty sure with colonization, the programming about the sanctification of whiteness and white supremacy starts very early on, right? This is why you have Asian cultures. It's the eye surgery, right? It's the bleaching of the skin, right? So this type of programming, this type of colonization of the mind is something that actually takes place way before they even get to America. So when they get to America and they have this proxy to whiteness, right? And they're existing within a society that says, yes, to be white is the standard, then that's exactly what they're going to subscribe to because they want to have a sense of belonging. So that's where a lot of the values are coming from, right? But when you start talking about Black people today, if you are someone who, if you're not fortified, right, in African American studies, and I really mean this, right, because you have to know what has happened to you. You have to work through so much. You have to know what happened to your people. And outside of what has happened to us as a culture, outside of what then happened to us as, within our communities, because that's another part of the history that we don't study, which is the events that were a little bit more recent, right? It's your crack era. You know what I mean? It's the byproduct of that. It's the domestic violence not being illegal till 1997. You know, it's the liquor stores replacing the grocers on every corner, right? It's those things. It's the food deserts, right? It's what really happens when you go into the welfare system and how if you do take a job at McDonald's and you're making $8.50 an hour, now you lose your benefits, right? Like it's that type of thing. You know, it's that really lived real life experience that I just don't think people know how people have got there. And so then what you have is a byproduct of persons who aren't educated, right? And they do exhibit some type of disruptive behavior, so to speak, right? Or they are living their lives and it's not to any, standard of white supremacy. Or, okay, if you don't want to say white supremacy, we can say to an American standard, you're frustrated at them. You say, well, this is why Black people just can't get ahead, right? But then you'll go out into the world, if you're wise enough, right? You'll go out into the world, you'll experience whiteness, and you'll realize, well, hey, I think people can be good and bad on both sides. You know what I mean? I think that people can be ignorant on both sides, right? And so you stand you stand in yourself, right? And you recognize America for what it is, right? It's this really big, messy thing. And really what it's done is not just deprive people of opportunities, it's deprived people of the truth of who it is, right? Of who we are, right? How we got here, right? Our educational system has failed everybody. You know, it's not just one person. It's not, oh, you're dumb and you're degenerate because you went to public school, or, oh, you're smart because you went to Howard. No. You know what I mean? Well, that will make a difference. But, I'm saying overall, it's our educational system has failed everybody. And so now they're posing the question of well, what are we going to do about schools, right? The Daily just put out a podcast and they were saying, hey, listen, people are wanting choice, right? People are wanting to educate their kids through homeschool. And then you have other people who are like, I want to, send my kid to a private school, which the numbers largely convey that it's Black parents and it's Hispanic parents who actually want to send their kids to private school and get them out of public schools. And for good enough reasons, right? We've been kept out of enough. And then, so there's that, right? But then the other side of that is with homeschool, right? You have parents who are buying trampolines and who are wanting tax write-offs, right? Come on now, let's talk about the culture, okay? Who are wanting tax write-offs for field trips. Dates to the aquarium, taking kids on cruise trips and taking their family on a cruise ship and saying, well, hey, this was a field trip, a part of the homeschooling program, and we want a tax credit. You know what I mean? So I just think that when you start to recognize that there's corruption on both sides, right? There's corruption in the world just in general, right? The culture of scammery, okay? The culture of colonizing, it's all there, right? Bribery, theft, it's all there. Criminality, murder, brutality, it's all there. So that's what you kind of have to understand. I don't think you get there until you start to have a little bit more of a well-rounded view. And I do think that takes a lot of years of unlearning. Like I said, it's not just the history. You have to see, okay, what happens after we were free? All right. And then what happened with my mama's generation? What happened with my daddy's generation? What was going on? I always give the example of the film, it was King Richard, right? And there's a scene where King Richard is, raising up, he's depicted as he is the depiction of the father of Venus and Serena. And he's, taking his girls out to the tennis court. It's it's a communal tennis court, and they've been playing on it for all these years, et cetera, et cetera. And then one late night, they start to kind of show how the community is changed. The music has changed, right? And now guns are in the community, right? But prior, it was loving. Prior, it was a completely different thing. He was able to talk to the boys. Now it's violence, right? And so I just think that we have to start to kind of recognize the influence and what is really taking place and what has been introduced into the community by those who do have the power to introduce it. You know what I mean? So when you start talking about whose fault is it, and I don't want to say point the finger, because that's just leaning a little too political for me. And that's not where I'm trying to go. I'm just more so trying to, convey my point of view. You start to recognize, okay, what took place? You know what I mean? What happened? What was, being brought into the community? Then you kind of start to see that breakdown. And, rightfully so. You can absolutely look over into other communities and say, well, wait a minute. Why is their music not being, why are they having a different experience with music, right? Why are certain things not being allowed? Why is there a certain, disapproval, right? Or collective, casting out, essentially, of a certain artist who behaves a certain type of way. You see what I'm saying? So it's cultural differences, it's cultural norms. And I just always give people this example. For most people who are alive today, you can look back and, depending on where you grew up, but I think for the most part, I feel like this was pretty collective, right? Back in 2018, we just did not have all these issues that we have today. What we're seeing today is really just, it's really disheartening. You have a lot of Black people who just, either they were too young to remember, or they just, I don't know, but I don't know. I think somewhere along the way, it's been lost on us that we have this belief now that we've always been flawed. We've always been fundamentally broken, that we've never been able to get along. There's always been abuse, and none of these things are true. None of these things are true. And so this is white supremacist thinking. And this is what happens when you send young people, and you integrate them into society. And even if they're not being integrated into society, but they're being integrated online, and they don't have any prior knowledge, they have no historical pretense to really ground them, right? Black people, Black students, Black youth, Black children need historical truth to ground them in this society, okay? Because they're going to have a lot of questions about a lot of different things. And it does not take, anything profound, to happen to be a little kid and realize, like, oh, wait a minute, I'm at the store and this child is treated differently, or I'm at daycare, this child is treated differently, not just by me, but by other people. You know what I mean? Like, there's a difference here, or to say, oh, I'm not the majority, or, there's only one of me, And so I don't know. I think when you start talking about politics, one of the things that is going to be a disruptor is compassion, right? People want a reason to pounce. They want a reason to attack somebody. You know what I mean? And I don't know what that is. Again, it could be self-hate, right? When you think about the word hate is destructive. Hate is murderous, right? And that's exactly what led to lynchings, right? That's exactly what led to, the breakdown in a child's spirit and their willingness to learn. When you start talking about, desegregating schools and what really started to take place there, right? That's kind of what happens to, a broken spirit. It then goes out and it wants to inflict harm on others, right? And this is why I say with Candace Owens, you talk about her being this woman for the people. I'm seeing a broken spirit. I don't see a woman who's compassionate and, who is kind and, who can really be a world changer by and large. I see someone who quite literally wants to break other women's spirits. However you want to slice it and dice it. I don't see a woman who's coming out and having conversations with women about SA. I don't see a woman coming out and talking about, the very real byproduct of SA, which is promiscuity. You know what I mean? I don't see a woman coming out and relating with women and touching hearts. And I'm not saying she has to be a prophet, you know what I mean? But I'm also not saying that, this is a Jackie Kennedy. All right. Hey, that's her lane. Okay. Well, actually not, because Kennedy was a Democrat. Okay. Y'all want to talk politics. So, I just think that at the end of the day, the climate in itself is just very hateful. And with the hateful spirit, you do get murder as a byproduct, right? And so whether that's just, people coming in the comments trying to, really attack your personhood, or, even other, real harm, and so that's kind of what you're seeing today. And it's really, really unfortunate. I think the work of independent study is so incredibly laborious. You have to be someone who's very astute, very self-disciplined. In addition to that, you have to have a background and a little bit of I don't even want to say it's how your brain works, but you have to have some type of experience to be able to study something independently, understand it, and really be able to build upon the knowledge, right? And have these building blocks to be able to look at concepts in a different way, to see, intelligence is a muscle and it can be developed, but most people are not developing that. People are reading things online, but they're completely blindsided to the other aspect of things, right? And it's unfortunate because people aren't really living through their lived experiences anymore. People know good and well, Black people who are struggling with self-hate, good and well, you're experiencing racism, but it's like you're choosing to turn the blind eye. And so one book that I could definitely recommend, especially for those who are struggling with self-hate, is Rock My Soul by Bell Hooks. One of the reasons why I always recommend Bell Hooks is because, one, she's a Black philosopher. And so we start talking about ideologies and paradigms and what is needed within the Black community, which I think is a healthy sense of self. And most importantly is the need to know how to think. Right? How to think correctly, how to think about yourself, most importantly, because if you hate yourself, you're not going to have any esteem to really get anything done. I don't really care what you do, right? You're going to make choices that not only compromise yourself, but they compromise your integrity. It compromises your spirit, and it will eventually, and it compromises your community. And, you can kind of bury yourself in that, and maybe bury yourself in the accomplishments or in the privileges of whiteness. But I think at the end of the day, you will always really know the truth. I just think that there's really something very unsettling about one's spirit when you live a life without purpose and you live life without integrity, and you're incredibly dishonest. So, yeah. Anyway, hang on. Anyway, I think when you start talking about self-hate, you got to get to the fundamentals. You have to get to what really broke you, what really is going on. And then one of the things that I spoke about in the previous episode is humanizing Black people, right? When I say humanizing Black people, that means recognize that we are capable of making mistakes. Part of what you're seeing today is the fallacy of Black excellence, right? And that fallacy is not what people would come to know as mediocrity. That fallacy is putting Black people on such a pedestal to say, since you are a Black person, you must be loyal to me, right? You must be loyal to me. You must be kind to me. When the reality is that this is a complete stranger. Right? That's humanizing Blackness. And that's exactly why we're a lot of Black people who are struggling with self-hate, they fail to overcome emotionally, right? Because they don't humanize other Black people. Most of us don't humanize one another. When one of us commits harm against the other, this is why I always say I think that Black people are connected spiritually. There's got to be some type of connection here, because it just doesn't make any sense to why we're so offended, right? When one person does another thing to us, it has to be some type of spiritual something, right? And I do believe that. You start talking about slavery, you start talking about what really took place and the millions of families that were separated, right? I mean, come on, kindred spirits, hello. But anyway, when you start talking about humanizing Black people, it's recognizing that so this is what we do, right? Like, this is this example. Someone hurts you and you turn around and say, all Black people, all Black women, all Black, you know what I mean? And you don't do that with anybody else. It would just be like, oh, okay, this person, hey, it didn't work out, or this person, hey, they got their own issues. Now, granted, I am coming from a more emotionally intelligent perspective. So, me being emotionally mature, I'm not going to be like, but I've been in that space, and so when you start talking about humanizing Blackness, it's realizing that, hey, Black people can make mistakes. Black people can get it wrong. We're not all, bestie. And it's not because our culture is a fallacy, or our culture is a lie, or, whatever. No, it's because you're not buddy with the stranger next door. You know what I mean? You're not buddy with the colleague at work. Like, that's just life. You know what I mean? And you have people who have morals and values and who do good things. And then you have those who don't. Right. And so it's not necessarily a Black culture thing, and again, this is what the absorption of white supremacy will do to us. It will make us internalize so much, and we'll have all this self-hatred with no real understanding. And so the thing about racism, and I think Toni Morrison spoke about this, is how it keeps you focused on, it keeps you distracted, right? And what I'm going to interpret that is, and what I'm saying and how I'm using that in context is, it keeps you distracted from the fact that you can heal from trauma, you can heal from, grief, right? You can heal from experiencing loss. You know what I mean? And that's the thing about racism. It keeps Black people stuck from emotionally developing, essentially, because you don't humanize yourself. You just have this inherent belief that I am wrong. And that's another thing too with colorism. If people, when people absorb that stuff, like with colorism, and I don't want to be insensitive. Oh my God, y'all know. I think the thing about colorism that upsets me is when I ask people who've experienced colorism, what is it that you want from the Black community? What is it that you want us to do, right? Because we've acknowledged colorism exists. We have been encouraging of richer complexions, Black men and Black women. And I think that's something that upsets me. But I also don't want to kind of lean into any type of political view, and I don't want to be insensitive in regards to this language. But and this is, and I don't want to be insensitive to anybody's experience, but I think as someone who, I guess you could say, sits in the middle, and who has not experienced colorism to that extent, I just think we're all equal. I think equal in the sense of we're all Black, but I understand that does simplify that simplifies inequality, So I don't want to veer too far left, but I'm just using the example to say, if you are someone who struggles with colorism, if you believe that fundamentally you are flawed, then you won't do the work to heal yourself. You won't do the work to better yourself. You won't do the work to really love yourself. You see what I'm saying? And the thing about Black people, and we start talking about doing that healing work and humanizing one another, we get to the other side of that. And what that looks like is uplifting another Black person. What that looks like is having self-love for yourself and those within your community. Why? Because you realize that, we all going through this, right? When you start doing that work of healing, right, from your experiences, from what you didn't get, what you did get, from the racism that you've experienced, from the lost opportunities, from the, you will start to have so much more compassion for other Black people. So that's a distraction. It really distracts us from the healing work. And I'm not trying to be like, spiritual, but I'm serious, because the thing is, you recognize that every Black woman has likely experienced the same thing you've experienced, right? And that makes you more compassionate towards Black women. When people are dogpiling on Amanda Seales, I don't get it. Right? I don't get it, because I know what it is to be a Black woman and not be heard. I know what it is to be a Black woman who's intelligent and to be talked down to and still experience misogyny and still have to overcome patriarchy, even with gay men. You know what I mean? I know what it is to be a woman and to be intelligent and to always have that in question and to always have that challenge and to always have that in the space where it's like, prove it. You see what I'm saying? And I know what it is to be a Black woman and to perpetually be disrespected for no apparent reason. I've listened to like maybe 3 or 4 video essays on Amanda Seales, and I don't necessarily get into her personal life, but I just feel like the work that she does, I think it's important. I think it's important, and I just don't understand why she gets so much flack. Actually, I do understand why she gets so much flack for educating the Black community, and I just think by and large is because not only have we internalized, right, white supremacy and racism, right, about ourselves and self-hatred, but that's the society that we still exist within, right? And so when you really scroll down past the comments of people, dogpiling her, you actually start to see the racist. Yeah, you start to see the racist. You start to see how real it is and why her work and what it is that she's saying and doing is so radical and is so profound. And most importantly, it's important, right? Like, what is so wrong with her being a Black educator? Like, that's what I don't understand. And that's the type of world that we live in. You take very serious people. You take people who want to educate the community, people who want to, help other people genuinely, and it's like you put them in these melting pots where they're really left to fend for themselves and they're just looking like a chicken, right? You put them in these common spaces. Ooh, that's a good one. You put them in these common spaces and they get reduced. Right? They get reduced. And so that's why I think for me personally, I don't have any bad feelings about, well, never mind my feelings, but I don't have any I don't have a bad attitude when it comes to Amanda Seales. I think she reads. I think that's good enough. You know what I mean? I think that's good enough. I think that this country wants to forget so bad. I think it wants to forget so bad. I think that white students and white people and white young girls who integrate with Black girls and they see the culture and they see the remarkable resilience, brilliance, right? Fashion, candor, okay, and creativity that Black women have. And I think they want a part of that. And to be in that space and to say, wow, I want a part of this as a white American would require some level of humility, right? It will require some level of humility. It will require some level of racial reckoning. And I think in order to maintain white supremacy, which is the sanctification of whiteness, white Americans are going to bypass that, right? Because they've been doing it for years, right? They refuse to look in the mirror about the truth about our country, the truth about this history, the truth about what is still ongoing, okay? And they just won't acknowledge it. And so what they do is they want proximity to Black culture, to Black people, to Black women in this particular example. And so what they want to do is, this is why we're having this ushering of like, just erase the culture, right? And so emulation then becomes admiration, especially for the person who hates themselves, right? And then you have this like relationship where the white person knows that I have all these prejudices about you, right? But I'm going to pretend that I don't because you have something that I want, right? And that is proximity. That may be, to enter to a certain space, to have new experiences. We know that one of the benefits of white privilege is this bevy of cultural knowledge, right? White Americans are able to, on average, I would say, study abroad, right? Go help the kids in Africa, go to, you know what I mean? Like, these are opportunities that are afforded to white Americans and to Americans in general, right? We talk about the American dream. When you have the resources, you are able to garner a lot more experiences, right? But more specifically, we talk about white America and white privilege. It is the ability to be anywhere, right? Black Americans don't have that. Right. And so that's why sometimes you can feel tokenized. And when you come into these spaces and you don't really have a true understanding of who you are, and you can't say, or discern rather, is this person fetishizing me and my culture, or is this somebody who really wants to be my friend? What is our point of relation? Is it my cornrows, or is it, we have some shared interests, right? Or is it, my Black brother? You see what I'm saying? Like, you guys want to have these conversations or no? Should I keep going or, because that's the thing that's lost on y'all, and I say, y'all, that's a lot of people. That's the thing that's lost on you. Like, you're not listening. You don't get it. And so what happens within a society that is built on entertainment, and most importantly, depends on your entertainment and your distraction is when someone is serious, and then when someone is trying to educate you, they become a priority, right? They become a parody, right? It becomes reduced, right? And so absolutely, I can see Amanda, and I can totally relate, and I feel sorry for her, because it's like, I'm not sorry in the sense that she deserves pity, but I do think that her intelligence should be something that is revered, right? And it's unfortunate because you have all these people in the Black community who don't like her because of colorism. Y'all don't like her because of colorism, and it goes the opposite way, right? And I do think this in part is why Amanda is so radical about the Black community. In part is because of her rejection. You talk about, oh, she wants to be heard. She just wants to be seen. She just wants some attention. Yeah, because she's been rejected and ostracized, right? Because to be a Black radical is to be depicted as a Black Panther, right? And that just doesn't fit for a light-skinned woman. You see what I'm saying? Light-skinned people and the experiences that they endure in the Black community in terms of colorism and reverse colorism on light-skinned African Americans is that you're never really taken seriously, right? You can't be these things. You are to be pretty and privileged, right? And that's what we reduce light-skinned Americans to, because we don't understand their experiences, and because we are so caught up in our own experiences that the compassion, the healing, the community, it cannot thrive, right? It cannot thrive. It does not have a bed to thrive in and to be nursed, right? And so that's why I actually think that Amanda seeks attention, because she's saying, hey, listen, I'm doing this for the community. I'm educating people. Why do I not have a sense of a space to be revered within the community? I've done the movies. I've done the things. I've played my part. Why am I being rejected? And I'm saying colorism because I can't think of any other reason why, other than self-hate. Now, you could say, well, Nikki Giovanni did, but this different time. It was a different time, right? Where we are today, we don't want to be reminded, okay? We want to forget. We want to forget, because it's easier for us to forget than it is for white America to reckon with the truth of our country. So we want to forget, because if we were to remember, if we were to be taught collectively about Black history, collectively about the African American experience, collectively about the slaves that were brought here, right? Collectively about the ancestral experience, okay? We would all have a deep, deep sense of respect and admiration, okay, for Black people. It's not about being worshiped. No, it's not about being worshiped. It's about looking at history in real time, looking at something and being like, it is truly to be revered, because how in the heck did you do it, right? It didn't just stop with slavery. Oh, no. Right? There were drugs. There was violence. There were police. There were dogs, right? There were rats up in New York eating babies. Okay, let me chill, because I know that just sounds like a crazy fact, but that really happened. We were put into housing, right? Unsafe housing. It was all this affordable. It was like slumlords. You know what I mean? And to still see where we are today, to still see us alive, thriving, doing great things, you can't tell me you're not going to have much respect for your African American neighbor. You can't tell me that you're not going to have self-love for yourself. We absolutely can do anything. We've proven that. But it doesn't start today. It didn't start today. That progress that you're seeing, this whole, really, I don't want to say pseudo progress, because we are making progress today. But all this attitude of, we just make excuses. Oh, no, baby. You're standing right now on the backs of people who've come before you, who made you even having a podcast or you being on a platform and having an opinion possible. You see what I'm saying? And so when you're taught that you are nothing, when your only foundation for your sense of self is you are ignorant, you are reduced to your body, okay? You are reduced to violence, all right? You ain't gonna have no self-esteem. You don't even think positively about yourself. You don't even know where to start. You walk into the library, you have no idea, right? Because that's how far removed you are from the truth. You have no idea where to start. And so now all you have is platforms. All you have is people who have opinions, people who are trying to sell merchandise, people who are incredibly disingenuous and just as ignorant as themselves. All right. So that's where we are today. And if it ain't flashy, y'all ain't listening. So I think that's why me personally, I don't know, y'all. I might be packing it up and going home. Because I just don't know. I don't know. I know that the work is important, right? But I also know that it is a very lived experience. I know that I have influence where I go, right? I know that there's a calling on my life. I know that there is purpose in my life. But within this social media landscape, the truth is lost. All right. It's lost. And I just don't know if this work, being front and center, right, witnessing the ostracization of Amanda Seales, the humiliation of so many African American teachers, I'll just say, right. I think we have to question, this position of black radicalism. We have to question the it's not really martyrdom, but I do think we have to kind of question, what is it to be the sacrificial lamb for the community? What is it to put yourself out there in such a way, to take risk, to educate your people, right? You guys know that there was a library that Black people had to underground educating one another. I ain't talking Underground Railroad. I'm talking about, after that. I think this probably went on. Let's see. Let's go ahead and Google it. But let's see. The book is called Freedom Libraries, I believe. I have it in my cart. Let me see. On Thrift Books. Freedom Libraries. Hang on. Where is book? Oh, okay. I didn't even type. Where is book? Yeah, Freedom Libraries. Yep. And I was going to say the 1950s, and I was right. Well, 1965. All right. How the Freedom Libraries were at the heart of the civil rights movements. Terror, bombings, and eventually murder would be visited on the Freedom Libraries. People giving up their lives so others could read a library book. That is our history. You talk about resilience. That is our history. You talk about resilience. It's us still breaking barriers today. You talk about resilience. It's us still pushing through today. So when you start talking about victimhood, humanize Black people, right? Because what you're seeing is a person who has experienced trauma in real life. And because of racism, they haven't even been able to step outside, of the construct, of the color of their skin, of their experiences and how they're projected and seen in the world, to be able to heal themselves and say, you know what, I have experienced trauma. I need to go to therapy. I need to get help. Right. So most people don't know what they're talking about. And most people ain't going to sit down and read books. And that's just period. And most people don't have an education that is going to teach them about African American history, not because they're bad, not because they're ignorant, not because, there's something wrong with them and they're stupid and they don't love education. No, but because this system, educational system has failed everybody. You see what I'm saying? So that's where the compassion has to come in for those who want to enter into the space of academia, intellectualism, or scholarly study. You know what I mean? But it's not going to exist. So I'll be reconsidering some things. This is Black mental health and self-hatred. Peace.